Let not your heart be troubled. You are listening to the Sean Hannity Radio Show podcast.
The preliminary information from police sources, and I emphasize your world, my former world, preliminary, subject to change. It is a man in his middle 20s probably, possibly from Bangladesh. Been in the country about 7 years, who supposedly was setting the device off in the name of ISIS. So definitely a terrorist attack, definitely intended. As to whether the device malfunctioned or didn't function correctly, that'll have to be determined. As of the moment, he is apparently the only injured person in terms of from the event. Possibly others from the noise of the explosion, maybe ear issues. Police have him in custody, talking with him. Again, this information is all preliminary. There will be a significant investigation of the area in question, as you might imagine, that bomb squad, etc. There will be delays down at the Port Authority throughout most of the day while they conduct that investigation. It was in a passageway between the subway system and the Port Authority, between 7th and 8th Avenue.
Any evidence that there's an uptick in attempts or...
Most clear evidence that we had the bombing the night after I left my term as commissioner, Jimmy O'Neill's first night in office. We had just several weeks ago the attack along the Hudson, the Pikeway, and then we have had this one. That's 3 attacks, definite terrorist attacks. The pace is quickening, as we have been indicating that it would, that New York continues to remain the focus of interest because of what is happening right now, the intense publicity that anything that happens in New York brings about. And so this is something that we can anticipate. These attacks are going to increase.
They're preliminary facts. So it just happened a couple hours ago, so you have to understand these are preliminary facts. At approximately 7:20 in a below-ground walkway, which connects the I&D line at 4-2 and 8th Avenue with the IRT line at 4-2 and 7, then the shuttle at Times Square and the 1, 2, and 3 train. Police were called to a reported explosion. Responding units found an injured 27-year-old male. We've identified him as Akayed Ullah, Akayed Ullah. He had burns and wounds to his body. Preliminary investigation at the scene indicates this male was wearing an improvised, low-tech explosive device attached to his body. He intentionally detonated that device. Looks like there are 3 other people in the immediate area also sustained minor injuries, but Dan Nigro is going to talk about that. The subject was placed in custody and transported to Bellevue Hospital. Immediate police response to the scene included members of the Transit Bureau, Emergency Service Division, Bomb Squad, Counterterrorism, MTA Police, State Troopers, and the FBI's Joint Terrorist Task Force. In addition, the NYPD Strategic Response Group and Critical Response Command were assigned to other key transportation hubs in other locations throughout the city as a precautionary measure. This incident was captured on transit system video. A further review and interview of witnesses is underway. A thorough background investigation into Akayed Ullah is being conducted by the Joint Terrorist Task Force. We are asking anyone who may have any information about this individual or incident to call the terror hotline, and that's 888-NYC-SAFE.
Let's be clear, as New Yorkers, our lives revolve around the subways. When we hear of an attack in the subway, it's incredibly unsettling. And let's be also clear, this was an attempted terrorist attack. Thank God the perpetrator did not achieve his ultimate goals. Thank God our first responders were there so quickly to address the situation, to make sure people were safe. Thank God the only injuries, as we know at this point, were minor.
All right, those are the sounds from yesterday and the latest terror attack. Here you have in New York City, and this guy strapping a bomb on himself. This could have been far worse during morning chaotic traffic in New York in the subway station down by Times Square. And, no more perfect time to bring on our good friend, Jonathan Gillum. He has a brand new book out. It's out today. It's called Sheep No More. I was honored to write the foreword for this book. And you have wonderful people, my buddy Marcus Luttrell and some other wonderful people. Dave Webb was one of them. Then you've got a lot of military people, Rick Unger, all of our friends literally reading this book and loving it, The Art of Awareness and Attack Survival. It happens to be something that Jonathan and I discuss privately a lot because of my love of martial arts and self-defense. And the attitude is we can't be sheep anymore. I mean, this is like a terror attack a week. This is, and it's happening not just here, but all over the world. And I don't think most people are prepared to deal with any situation. And that's what I've learned in the 5+ years now that I've been doing martial arts, basically awareness and attack survival.
Look at what you've discussed over the past month alone, Sean. You've talked about sexual predators. You've talked about terrorist attacks. You've talked about people at the top of the FBI and our government that are criminals, basically. What this book does, and I know that's a huge stretch of different types of criminality, but the reality is all attackers build target packages on what they want to attack. They find a target, they look for the vulnerabilities, they look for the critical times, critical areas for those times. They look for the best avenue of approach, and then they exploit those things, and they create a target package. We can be doing the same thing, Sean. If you look at your life, when you get up in the mornings, when you commute to work, when you're here at the studio, you go to Fox, you commute home, you have about 5 to 10 different sectors in your life. And you literally, in each one of those sectors, have between 5 and 7 types of attacks that could happen to you. Once you discover those and you look at it from the attacker's point of view, there's no surprise anymore. You're going to know who, why, where, when, and how they could attack you, and then you either avoid it or you mitigate the circumstances. And it doesn't matter if it's a Harvey Weinstein or if it's an ISIS guy trying to blow up Times Square. Once you realize who they are and where they're coming from, you can mitigate those things.
I agree. One of the things that has been really amazing is the military, and many observers, as soon as Donald Trump changed the rules of engagement and allowed the military to do their job, and we're not guiding wars through Washington.
Right.
We have been able to deeply degrade ISIS at a level that even military guys on the ground said that they were shocked about. All right, let me play. A lot of this was also connected to chain migration. And
Right.
this gets to the issue of vetting refugees and building the wall. Let me play what the president said about ending chain migration.
Before we begin, I want to address the terrorist attack that took place yesterday in New York City and to praise the first responders, local police, and federal law enforcement for their quick action. They did an incredible job. There have now been 2 terrorist attacks in New York City in recent weeks carried out by foreign nationals here on green cards. The first attacker came through the visa lottery, and the second through chain migration. We're going to end both of them. The lottery system and chain migration. We're going to end them fast. Congress must get involved immediately, and they are involved immediately, and I can tell you we have tremendous support. They will be ended.
This is the simple common sense that needs to be applied to every person in this country in terms of if they want to survive, which is, I'll get into that in a second, that you talk a lot about in the book.
Sure. Listen, it doesn't matter if it's chain migration, if it's the way the State Department sets up vetting overseas, or the way that our military is now allowed to fight. What happens, or look at stop and frisk and the surveillance of the mosques that were stopped here. When we have bad policy that's set up strictly because of politics, either eliminating something or creating a void, where that void is at is where bad people exist, and that's how nefarious people operate. They look for those voids. The fact that the president identified chain migration, he's identified the borders in this country, he's identified so many different vulnerabilities, and also the rules of engagement. He's identified those vulnerabilities, those voids where these bad people operate, and he's eliminating those, shows you that he is understanding and his awareness is heightened, and he understands where these types of political mistakes have been made so he can fix these things and close the gap on these bad people.
You know, you have to look at this on the micro level and on the macro level. We as a country, we've got to fight radical Islamists. We've got to fight mullahs in Iran. We've got to fight evil wherever it exists. But, you know, you start out by actually defining key terms, predator and prey.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that drew me to you as a friend was when I do self-defense, which is Krav Maga, Kempo, jiu-jitsu, boxing, blade and firearm training. That also includes defensive blade and firearm training. If you have a gun pointed at your head,
right,
what you do. If you have a gun at your back, if you have a gun at your chest.
Yeah.
If somebody pulls out a blade, which can be more deadly than a firearm in some instances, if somebody's, you know, trained in the use of that blade.
Sure.
You're telling people that they have got to understand what this is about for them and what they need to know and how they're going to deal with evil if it confronts them in life.
Exactly. Sean, if you go look at the animals on the plains of Africa, you have the lions, which are the predators, and you have, like, let's say the gazelle, who are a prey. But the gazelles don't show up at the water hole completely clueless, looking at a cell phone with no idea where the bad guy's going to come from. They actually know exactly how the bad guy works, but they have to put themselves in that environment to get water. So they know how to act, not just react. They know where the bad guy's going to come from, and that's why they're constantly looking, observing, and then if something happens, they react, or they with action, right? So action beats reaction. I know you hear that all the time. That is where people need to get in their mind.
The average person walking through the streets of New York City, they've got their headphones on or in their ears, or they're text walking, or they're talking on the phone. They have zero situational awareness.
And I've talked about this 100 times when I think really if we look at the shooting, the mass shooting in Vegas, as soon as it happened, what did people do? They assumed that it was fireworks instead of assuming it was an attack. And then, and this is, no, I'm not hitting on anybody for this because this is where we have to get away from this mindset. But the promoters, the sound people, the lighting people, what'd they do? They sat there and tried to figure it out, and they turned the lights on, and everybody laid down. They pretty much just presented a huge target. No different than if you go in a range and you have a static target.
Now you can see everybody.
So if they had understood the reality that we're in, maybe you wouldn't have as many drinks when you go there, but if you hear some popping over, instead of saying that's probably fireworks, you say, I think that's gunshots. Let's keep the lights off and already have a plan. Not make it up there. Have a plan.
But it's where you sit in restaurants, for example. You know, I mean, there's certain little things that you can do to increase your safety odds that if something happens, or even a movie theater, for crying out loud.
Every place, I can guarantee you, the majority of places you go, take when the Ariana Grande concert was blown up, right? Had you done these parents had done any type of online surveillance of that area, they would have known that is the drop-off and pickup area. They should have told their kids, wait 10, 15 minutes, be the last ones out of the stadium. We'll get you down the road here. Don't come out this area. That's a critical area, and that's a critical time. Unfortunately, they don't think like that, and those kids and those adults are dead now.
All right, quick break. We'll come back more with Jonathan Gillum and his brand-new book, Sheep No More. Jonathan Gillum continues with us. His brand-new book out today, Sheep No More. You can get it on Hannity.com. You know, I don't think people are fully aware of the dangers that police, law enforcement have to deal with every day, and maybe they shouldn't have to be aware of it. But I do think that there's the thing that bothers me, and this is for a lot of my friends. I ask them all the time, what are you going to do? What happens if? And I run through scenarios with them.
Right.
And I'd say the vast majority have no clue what they're going to do if something happens.
And that what-if game that you talk about in the forward and we talk about in the book, that what-if game is really, that's what we're doing here. It's one of the most important things that you can do. You can start teaching kids this at 9 years old. You can teach old people this. The reality is, like truckers, a lot of truckers listen to this radio show.
Yeah.
They park their trucks in places where they wouldn't normally park their truck. Right. They should be able, before they park there, should get on Google Earth, do a map study of where they're at. I would call the local precinct and say, I'm parked here. They may not want to hear it, but now you've identified who you are and that you're here. Right. These are things that you have to think of before you get there by playing the what-if game.
All right, let's talk about the rest of the book here. As you put it all together, you talk about escaping, evading, fighting, fear, the defender, building an attacker's target package. The reality is we're all sitting ducks in
some way or
some
shape.
ways.
Right. You know, these women that were going up to Harvey Weinstein's hotel room, they could have pre-thought that out. It was no surprise he was going to try to pull that on people. Why not bring somebody with you? Why not bring another person with you, a guy with you, your manager? You see, these are things that you can do to mitigate these circumstances. If I was a female working for NBC and I knew Matt Lauer was a predator, I would have made sure before I went into that room that I had somebody with me or I had somebody calling me within 3 or 4 minutes to tell, just so I could say, oh, I got a meeting, I got to go. There's ways that you can think like this predator and then actually mitigate the circumstances. We have to get to a point. And the other thing you just said there is, instead of saying, if you get yourself into something like happened in Times Square, it's not run, hide, or fight. It's escape, evade, or fight. Escape means that you're doing your best to get out of there, but using cover and concealment. Evade means you may hide, but you're going to continue to move.
This is a self-defense book and something you're going to learn about how to keep yourself and your family safe and learn a lot about how dangerous this world can be. It's called Sheep No More. Jonathan Gillum. We'll put it on our website, Hannity.com. The Art of Awareness and Attack Survival. 800-941-SEAN is our number. Good congratulations on the book. We really love it, and we're glad it finally came out. Sean Spicer at the bottom of this half hour as we continue.
Let's put it this way. There is absolutely no collusion. That has been proven. When you look at the committees, whether it's the Senate or the House, everybody, my worst enemies, they walk out, they say, there is no collusion, but we'll continue to look. They're spending millions and millions of dollars. There is absolutely no collusion. I didn't make a phone call to Russia. I have nothing to do with Russia. Everybody knows it. That was a Democrat hoax. It was an excuse for losing the election.
We've learned about Donald Trump Jr. eagerly accepting a meeting to get dirt on Hillary Clinton from somebody he was told was a Russian lawyer. We've learned with the Comey plea agreement with George Papadopoulos, former foreign advisor for the Trump campaign. We've learned that he was told by a professor with ties to the Kremlin in April 2016, long before I knew anything about the hacking or the public knew anything about the hacking, that the Russians were claiming that they had damaging information. Now, you said in January 2017, this year, that you knew of no collusion. Did you know of those two events?
No, I did not. And the statement I made at the time was true. I had no direct evidence of collusion. Now, we had lots of concerns because we were aware of multiple meetings that were going on, while at least my part was not aware directly of the content of these meetings. But we were certainly concerned, and the metaphor I've used before is I think our dashboard warning lights were clearly on about what was going on. But to say specifically that we had evidence of smoking gun evidence of collusion, no. But, of course, a lot more has come out that's, raises, I think, circumstantial questions, if nothing else.
But Mr. Clapper then went on to say that, to his knowledge, there was no evidence of collusion between members of the Trump campaign and the Russians. We did not conclude any evidence in our report. And when I say our report, that is the NSA, FBI, and CIA, with my office, the Director of National Intelligence, that had any reflection of collusion between the members of the Trump campaign and the Russians. There was no evidence of that in our report. Was Mr. Clapper wrong when he said that?
I think he's right about characterizing the report, which you all have read.
We did not include any evidence in our report, and I say our, that's NSA, FBI, and CIA with my office, the Director of National Intelligence, that had any reflection of collusion between members of the Trump campaign and the Russians. There was no evidence of that included in our report.
Have you seen anything, either intelligence briefings, anything to back up any of the accusations that you've made?
They have the documentation that they did the hacking.
The hacking.
On the DNC.
Right.
And on some of us, that had.
But the collusion, though.
No. We have not.
Do you have evidence that there was, in fact, collusion between Trump associates and Russia during the campaign?
Not at this time.
Have you seen anything that suggests any collusion between the Russians and the Trump campaign?
Well, there's an awful lot of smoke there, let's put it that way. People that might have said they were involved, to what extent they were involved, to what extent the president might have known about these people or whatever. There's nothing there from that standpoint that we have seen directly linking our president to any of that.
Did evidence exist of collusion, coordination, conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russian state actors at the time you learned of 2016 efforts?
I don't know whether or not such collusion, that's your term, such collusion existed. I don't know.
The big questions, of course, is there any evidence of collusion you have seen yet? Is there?
There is a lot of smoke. We haven't a smoking gun at this point, but there is a lot of smoke.
Dianne Feinstein has said there's no evidence of collusion. So collusion between whom? Can you tell us that?
I'm not prepared to say that there's proof you could take to a jury, but I can say that there is enough that we ought to be investigating.
At the time you separated from service in January of 2017, had you seen any evidence that Donald Trump or any member of his campaign colluded, conspired, or coordinated with the Russians or anyone else to infiltrate or impact our voter infrastructure?
Not beyond what has been out there open source, and not beyond anything that I'm sure this committee has already seen and heard before directly from the intelligence community.
Our source is not the Russian government.
So, in other words, let me be clear. Russia did not give you the Podesta documents or anything from the DNC.
That's correct.
All right, so there you have it. Again and again, a year's investigation. No evidence. The one guy that knows, Julian Assange. Oh, it's not Russia. It's not a state. And then, of course, we've got pretty much everybody saying the same thing, even including James Clapper. No evidence of Trump-Russia collusion, but they don't stop. They don't stop ever. They're never going to stop. Their goal, what they want to do, is absolutely to destroy this president at any cost, any way imaginable. I talk about the forces against the president. We got the deep state. We got a corrupt media. We got Democrats. They don't want to do anything for this president. Weak Republicans and never Trumpers. In other words, the same people that hate anybody that likes Trump. Hence what we've been dealing with all weekend. Silence everybody. The number one censorship group in the country. The number one group, the most anti-free speech movement in the country. They want a world without Fox, without talk radio, without Rush, without Levin, without Laura, without Sean Hannity. That's the world they want to live in. Bought and paid for by millionaires and billionaires. Anyway, here to discuss all of this, Kirk Wiebe, former senior analyst, NSA. Bill Benny. Benny is with us. Rare in-studio appearance. Former technical director of the NSA World Geopolitical and Military Analysis and Reporting Group. Welcome, both of you. Bill, it's nice to see you in person.
Yeah,
how are
thanks.
you?
Good to see you, too.
How many years NSA?
32 as a civilian and 4 in the military.
All right, so that's 36 years of intelligence. We started out the presidency of Donald Trump with like a leak a day.
Yeah.
And one time on this program, you told me that every email, every text message, every phone call that we make, every American is being metadata stored.
Yes.
Every
that's
one.
Right. Yeah.
Isn't that illegal? Isn't that a violation?
Of course it is, yeah. But you can't get them into court, which I'm trying to do. I've got I'm supporting 3 separate lawsuits alleging the violation of the Constitution, First, Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments.
Yeah. So in other words, we have to go against our own government as weaponized intelligence.
Yeah, that's right.
So all the time we talked about the weaponization of the IRS under Obama against Tea Party affiliated groups, that turned out we got an apology recently.
Yeah.
A little late.
Yeah, but that also came out of that data too, because they showed the entire relationship of the Tea Party with anybody else that was trying to join that to get 501c3. So the IRS knew that right away, and they had direct access to that.
With all that we hear, it's like every time Donald Trump has gotten momentum, there's always something that throws the momentum off. Are you saying that they have everything they already want on Trump? They've already surveilled him to such an extent. Like, for example, I believe that it may turn out to be the Fusion GPS Russian propaganda lying dossier. Was that used as a predicate for a FISA warrant?
That very well could be. I don't know for sure, but certainly that is a possibility. Yeah.
But even beyond that, you're saying there was more surveillance.
Oh, yeah, they take in everything that we're saying and doing.
Everything. Can you prove that?
Well, yeah, I've proved it. I've already got the proof in the documents that I've submitted as sworn affidavits to the appeals courts.
Well, so basically, we have no freedom, and this is the predicate of a police state. What you're describing.
Yeah, I think Goethe captured it pretty well. He basically said that no one is more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they're free. That's us.
Kirk, do you agree with everything that Bill's saying?
Absolutely, and I wanted to point out that they're not just storing metadata, Sean. It's content as well.
Meaning what?
A good bit of evidence for that is when the Congress says, oh, we're going to forego, quote, about, unquote, stuff when we, under FISA. We're not going to look at that anymore. Well, you can't look at about if you don't have content.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a direct admission.
So what are we then to believe in terms of now that we know it's a bought and paid for propaganda dossier that they denied for a year? Just stay on the dossier for a second. What are we to believe that Hillary Clinton knowingly paid for Russian lies to help influence the American people and win an election? And now are we able to prove that finally?
Well, I think we will be able to. I think we're coming close. I don't know that we have the access necessary to do that definitively, but all the arrows certainly point in that direction.
So, Bill, I've talked to people that are in your crazy spy world community, and they're very interesting people to me. Look, I like spy novels. I like Jason Bourne. I think all that stuff is very cool. But the sophistication of intelligence gathering today, isn't that way beyond the comprehension? For example, any phone call can be tapped into, way beyond the comprehension of most people. But here's my question. Are you aware, is there such a thing as a deep state? Define it if it is. And what are they actively trying to accomplish here?
Well, I mean, I would put the intelligence community, all the agencies, as a part of that deep state, along with the part of the Congress, the intelligence committees, and I would also include the FISA court.
And when you say deep state, define that.
Well, it's the government behind the government that's basically pulling the strings, telling the supposed government where to go and what to do. That's why I called the Praetorian Guard for the country. They basically determine who the emperor is and what he does.
And Donald Trump broke that cycle.
Yes, he did.
And that's why there's widespread anger.
That's right.
But I've got to imagine, like you, there are plenty of good people in the intelligence community because they put their lives on the line to spy on our enemies using the powerful mechanism of intelligence gathering for our benefit, right?
That's right, yeah, but they're not the ones in charge of the agencies, and those are the people who are really a part of the deep state.
Do you have names of people? Like, for example, we talk about Obama holdovers. We see the unmasking. Why would Susan Rice and whoever, the UN ambassador Power,
right.
Samantha Power, why would they be unmasking Americans?
Well, I mean, if somebody's collaborating with WikiLeaks, they would certainly want to know who that is. And so if they unmask them, then they would know. And
so when I interview or talk to Julian Assange, they unmask me?
Yeah, just to know who you are or what you're doing. And also all of your conversation with them, if you're on the phone, or if you email them, all of that data is captured and reported.
But if I'm talking to, my brother-in-law, are they taking that conversation too?
Yes. Yeah, and the evidence I was accumulating showed that they were using translation devices to automatically do it, to try to get an 80% correct translation of the conversation on the phone.
Almost in real time, I hear they can do that.
Very close, yeah.
Unbelievable. All right, we'll take a quick break. We'll come back. 800-941-SEAN is our toll-free telephone number. You want to be a part of the program. And Congressman Jim Jordan, Matt Gaetz are going to join us. They are saying the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, needs to appoint a special counsel or it's time for him to go. We'll explain straight ahead.
Have you seen any evidence that this dirt, these emails, were ever given to the Trump campaign?
Not so far.
Not so far. Have you seen any communications that suggested that the Trump campaign wanted them to release them through a different means? Because obviously they were ultimately released by WikiLeaks.
No, I have not.
All right, as we continue, Sean Hannity Show. Kirk Wiebe, former senior analyst for the NSA. Bill Binney is a former technical director for the NSA World Geopolitical Military Analysis and Reporting Group. Kirk, how many years were you in the NSA and involved in intelligence gathering?
32, including military service.
All right, so you guys have combined, no offense, you're both like 100 years experience here. I listen to you, and the average American listens to you. Somebody once said to me, everything that the Obama holdovers, the deep state, ever wanted against Donald Trump, they already have. Is that true?
Yeah, they sure do. I mean, these people have access to everything, as Bill has been saying. By virtue of that, and because knowledge is extreme power, they have people right where they want them. They can blackmail them, they can threaten them, they can use anything against them, and the average employee doesn't even know that. I mean, what's really going on is known by the higher-ups, the higher-up managers. They're pulling the strings.
Mm-hmm. Well, who are the managers current? Are the managers from the Obama administration? Is this like passed on from generation to generation?
I don't think it's passed on. I think they're part of the holdover from the Obama. That's not to say, though, that there weren't holdovers from Bush, where the whole thing started. The whole mass surveillance began under Cheney and Bush. And
let me ask Bill this question. Then how does Donald Trump defend against something as illegal as what you're describing?
Well, I think he really has to get the Department of Justice moving against these people and start putting some in jail for the crimes they're committing. If he does that, then others will see that and start to stop.
And he can do that.
Yes, he can.
Well, it has to be his Justice Department, and they got to move, which we're going to talk about in the next hour. Great to see you in studio. I appreciate all your work. A little scary. You guys, if you wrote a novel like this, I'm not sure I'd even believe it. Yeah. Kirk, thank you, too, my friend. Hope to see you one day in the studio. 800-941-SEAN, toll-free telephone number. Freedom Caucus Congressman Jim Jordan, Matt Gaetz of Florida, they're coming on. They said the wait's over. They're calling on the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, make things happen and get to the bottom of Fusion 1, the Russian dossier, or frankly, maybe he needs to go. We'll get to that more next Sean Hannity Show.
This fake dossier was made up, and I understand they paid a tremendous amount of money, and Hillary Clinton always denied it. The Democrats always denied it. Well, I think the uranium sale to Russia and the way it was done, so underhanded, with tremendous amounts of money being passed, I actually think that's Watergate modern age. This was the Democrats coming up with an excuse for losing an election. It's an election that's very hard for a Democrat to lose because the Electoral College is set in such a way that it's very hard to lose that election for a Democrat. They lost it. They lost it very badly and very easily. I mean, you look at the votes. It was 306 to what, 223 or something. They lost it by a lot. They didn't know what to say, so they made up the whole Russia hoax. Now it's turning out that the hoax is turned around, and you look at what's happened with Russia, and you look at the uranium deal, and you look at the fake dossier, so that's all turned around.
We know there was a huge amount of content being produced in places like Macedonia. We know that WikiLeaks, which is basically a front now for Putin, was more than willing to publish stolen emails from the DNC, from John Podesta, and that then those emails were weaponized with ridiculous, absurd, untrue stories being churned out, on and on. So there's a lot we know already.
You followed this extremely closely.
Well, I started following this back in the summer of 2016 because there was something going on. When the DNC hack happened, we had a huge political crisis when Republicans physically broke in to the Democratic Party's records back in the so-called Watergate years. This is a different kind of theft. And it's.
Do you think this is bigger than Watergate?
I think it's probably bigger than Watergate because it is about the future.
So you write in your book that the impact of voter suppression didn't get enough attention in 2016. Mm-hmm. And there was one study that found that there were 1 million lost votes in the 2016 election. So do you think voter suppression cost you the election?
I think it contributed to the outcome. I think in a couple of places, most notably Wisconsin, I think it had a dramatic impact on the outcome.
You said Bob Mueller's a zealot.
He is.
And you were emphatic about it.
He is. I had experiences with him.
What kind of experience?
Well, I had a case, and my colleague Harvey Silverglade and I went to see him in Washington, and we started to talk about prosecutorial and misconduct by the FBI, and he cut us off. And he said, it's a non-starter to talk to me about FBI misconduct or prosecutorial misconduct. It's a non-starter. He doesn't want to hear about that. He is in the business of protecting the FBI, protecting prosecutors at all costs. I don't suggest he's unethical, but he's very zealous, and he uses a tactic that's very questionable.
I would argue, then, that's probably what makes him good at his job. Is that wrong?
It makes him effective at his job, but the job of a prosecutor is to do justice, not to get as many notches on his belt as possible. And I think this tactic...
You believe that's what he's...
Well, I think he's... Look, he is the special counsel. He has an enormous budget. He has a man with his target on his back, the President of the United States. He's not going to be satisfied until he gets to the President or people very close to him. That's the danger of a special prosecutor.
Wow, Alan Dershowitz in that last comment, pretty powerful. You know, Hillary will blame anybody and everybody. There's no evidence at all that any Republican had anything to do whatsoever with the DNC leaks of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. I wish somebody, Mueller or somebody, besides Dana Rohrabacher and myself, would ask the one guy on the face of this earth what evidence he has that would show it's not Russia, and we could put this whole mess to an end, and the American people deserve the truth after all this, whatever the truth is. And he's told me multiple times it's not Russia. Like him, dislike him, doesn't matter. He's the one that knows. Anyway, was this all a massive plot to destroy Donald Trump? Was it actually organized and orchestrated? In other words, I've always talked about 5 forces against the president, the deep state. And, of course, you got liberal Democrats. They don't want the president to succeed. This president has dealt with nearly a leak a day of intelligence and an unmasking and then leaking intelligence and you know, all this stuff happening. Then you got a media that hates him. Then you got Republicans that hate him. Then you got never-Trumpers that are at war with him. Was this a plan that was hatched, and who did it? Well, that's the thesis of a brand new book by Ed Klein. It's called The Plot to Destroy Donald Trump. Ed Klein, you may remember, former foreign editor of Newsweek, former editor-in-chief of the New York Times Magazine, contributing editor of Hannity Fair. And every time you write a book, all those people that you used to know, love, and like, and that praised your work, they hate you. Is there a plot to destroy? Was this plot hatched in December, as you saying? And what evidence do you have?
Well, according to a senior Clinton campaign strategist who worked for Hillary in both 2008 and 2016, Hillary Clinton personally authorized her campaign chairman, John Podesta, to launch this controversial Donald Trump Russian dossier. Not only that, Hillary approved Podesta's decision to pay for the dossier by funneling campaign funds, I believe unlawfully.
Now, it's interesting because this has just all come out after a year of lying, and this book had to go to press how long ago?
Oh, I'd say about 2 months ago.
Yeah, I mean, for those that don't know the publishing business, you knew about this 2 months ago.
Yes.
And now we've been able to prove that.
Absolutely pinned it down, Sean. There's no question in my mind.
She paid for the dossier.
The dossier was delivered to the Clinton campaign by Fusion GPS, that's the opposition research firm, in the summer of 2016, and Hillary read it, and I'm told by this campaign strategist who was there, she was thrilled by its salacious content. She even bragged about it, so much so that the people in her Brooklyn campaign headquarters knew about it. They all knew about not all, the top echelon knew about it. And she said, and I'm quoting now, according to this campaign strategist, this is my secret weapon and it's going to blow Trump out of the water. That's what she said.
And it all ended up being Hillary, DNC, Obama bought and paid for lies, propaganda, misinformation, disinformation.
That's right.
From Russia.
From Kremlin Secret Intelligence Service types who are working to get this disinformation into our system.
And this is the dossier that claimed that Donald Trump was in the Ritz-Carlton with two hookers who were urinating in his bed.
All BS, as you know.
All of it.
Right.
And yet it was repeated all over television.
Well, even worse than that, Jennifer Palmieri, who is the communications director of Hillary's campaign.
Total hack, yeah.
Oh, boy. And Brian Fallon, her press secretary, leaked this stuff to friendly reporters and congressmen. And this stuff got into large circulation among the media, which did not repeat the words because they couldn't prove it. But the very thesis that there was a collusion took effect, and that's where it started to spread.
If you listen to the left, they're going to tell you, and their arguments all over TV, which is predicated on a lie, is that, well, Republicans, and now we know it was the Washington Free Beacon and what's his name, Paul Singer. That they funded this. That's true.
But they
didn't fund Steele's research.
That's right.
Which is a very big distinction. None of this was Russian related. They were just doing simple op research.
Research, right.
In your book, you say that this is a plot. Everyone's going to say you're a conspiracy theorist, that it was a real plot to destroy Trump. I assume you're talking about the deep state and other ways that was initiated in the Obama White House. Does this have to do with the unmasking?
Yes.
Does this have to do with intelligence leaking?
On December 16, Susan Rice, the National Security Advisor, was invited to the family quarters of the White House for a dinner. My source was at this dinner. She presented a scheme or a plot or whatever you want to call it to unmask the names of Trump aides and advisors that were gathered when the NSA was doing electronic intercepts, and to unmask these names. And then she asked the president for permission to spread these names throughout the intelligence community with the knowledge that if she did so, they would leak to the press. This is where it all began in this meeting, and the president sat there and approved it.
So
Obama.
So in other words, when you hear the UN ambassador Samantha Power in the course of an election year, now this I guess predates this meeting with Susan Rice in the residence of the White House, because she was unmasking
230 some odd,
almost
right?
an unmasking a day. And why would the UN ambassador ever need to do that? And you got Susan Rice and Ben Rhodes and everybody else involved in this.
Yeah, Ben Rhodes is a big player in this unmasking thing, because he was Susan Rice's deputy, but he really, in a sense, ran the National Security Council under Susan Rice. And he was the guy, of course, who did the Iran deal for Obama. He's a real bad actor in this situation.
You claim, and I think I'm one of the few in the country that believes and knows and understands what the deep state means.
Yes.
And there is a deep state.
And the FBI has infiltrated the deep state. And I actually print an FBI report in this book about that.
Okay, this is what I want to know. You have two exclusive FBI reports in the book that prove the existence, of the deep state that are working against Trump. I'll get to the ISIS side of it in a second. How do you have that information? What do those reports specifically say and claim?
Well, those reports say that agents of the FBI, and this is a written report, that I actually saw, that was delivered to the director of the FBI from the field offices. About 2,000 interviews took place, and they infiltrated meetings in Washington and other places where these rogue elements in the bureaucracy were being taught and told how to slow walk the agenda of the Trump administration, how to make files disappear, how to erase computer files. And a lot of this information was being instructed to them by union organizers. And This took place in a church in Washington, D.C. This is one meeting. So this is the FBI has no doubt. They didn't use the word deep state, but they did describe what is the deep state.
All right, we'll come back. We'll pick it up. Ed Klein is with us. The plot to destroy Trump. How many number one bestsellers have you had?
This will be the third.
This will be very confidently. How many bestsellers have you had?
Well, this one is going to be
number one.
One.
I kind of suspect you're right. All right, we'll take a break. More with Ed Klein. We have a lot of ground to cover here. We may hold them past the bottom of the hour. As we continue, Sean Hannity Show. Joining us is Ed Klein, number one New York Times bestselling author. His brand new book out, The Plot to Destroy Trump. And we were talking about the deep state and how they're working against Trump. Now, if we know that this deep state exists, and what we're really talking about is weaponizing the powerful tools of intelligence gathering, where they could listen into any conversation of any American anytime.
That's right.
You know, Bill Binney, who's been on this program, says every call, every email, every text message is all metadata gathered and secured in some of these data centers that the government has.
And we know that the intelligence community set out from the very beginning with John Brennan, who was then the head of the CIA, to undermine Donald Trump. And Brennan was a terrible, terrible opponent of Trump. He hated the idea that Donald Trump was trying to make a deal with the Russians on certain areas where they could cooperate, such as, for instance, Syria. He did, and this went against Brennan's religion, if you want to call it that, and the religion of the intelligence community. And this intelligence community has been rogue ever since Trump won the election.
Well, to me, that is key, because if the weaponry of intelligence is turned against the American people, and it has been, if you're unmasking Americans for no good reason at all, just for political purposes. For example, was the FISA warrant based on the phony, salacious Hillary Clinton bought and paid for dossier?
We don't know, but we assume that probably was.
Oh, I think it was.
Yeah, I do too.
Now, that would mean any evidence that they gotten out of that would be inadmissible in court, wouldn't it?
Right. Why otherwise would James Comey have briefed Trump and Obama on this dossier if he didn't think it was valuable and usable for intelligence purposes?
It wouldn't make sense.
No, of course not.
Yeah, in a lot of different ways. All right. What about the FBI reports warning that ISIS ties to the anti-Trump resistance and highlighting the danger of domestic terrorism from anti-Trump radicals? You're saying basically this is a propaganda campaign that was hatched.
You're talking about the ISIS connection,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
Okay, here's the FBI, what they say. Quote, there is clearly overwhelming evidence that there are growing ties between U.S. radicals and the Islamic State, as well as several ISIS offshoots and splinter groups. This is the greatest challenge to law enforcement, and this is still a quote, since the Weather Underground and the Black Panther Party.
And who's connected to this?
So here's what happened. The FBI, in the summer of 2016, sent a group of agents to Germany for the G20 summit of chief industrialized countries.
Right.
And there were a lot of protests on the street, and they discovered that Antifa, these American violent groups, were taking part in these protests. So they followed them. And what they discovered is that they had contacts with Al-Qaeda operatives and ISIS operatives. And when they went deeper into it with Interpol and others, they discovered that our locally grown left-wing anarchists who are smashing everybody, property and beating up people.
Occupy Wall Street, Antifa.
Those whole groups were getting instructions on how to make bombs and how to use...
From who? And how do you know this?
How do I know? From the FBI report, yeah.
And you're printing the report inside the book?
The entire report is printed.
All right, we'll take a break. Ed Klein is with us, The Plot to Destroy Trump, and he's talking at length about the intel of the left's, what he's saying is a conspiracy to take down the president of the United States. But when you look at all that's happened in a year, have we ever had this level of unmasking, ever have this abuse of intelligence weaponry? Now we have the admission that, the IRS was used as a weapon against the American people. All scary stuff. We'll take a break.
At one point, the Attorney General had directed me not to call it an investigation, but instead to call it a matter, which confused me and concerned me. but that was one of the bricks in the load that led me to conclude I have to step away from the department if we're to close this case credibly.
Joining us now, Tom Fitton is with us, and Tom is the president of Judicial Watch, and we've got to send out major kudos to these guys because they have uncovered more information regarding both the Loretta Lynch tarmac meeting and the relationship between Mueller's special lieutenant, this ever-corrupt Andrew Weissman, and his relationship and praise of Sally Yates, who, of course, defied the president's orders as an Obama holdover. And I'm so in awe, so proud of you. Weissman is now caught sending to Yates, which it shows, just like in the case of this guy, Peter Strzok, that they have political agendas, and it's anti-Trump and it's pro-Hillary. Well, how can these people possibly be involved in these investigations? It is so corrupt. Tom Fitton joins us right now. How are you, sir?
Hi, Sean. Good to be with you again. Thank you.
All right. I want you to explain in detail the Freedom of Information Act request. If I'm not mistaken, I think you filed this back in May of this year. You finally got a hold of it. A couple of smoking guns come out of this. Among them, Andrew Weissman, who I have explained in great detail on this program, was the guy in the Anderson Accounting, Enron, Merrill Lynch cases, and how he is praising the woman that defied the president and an Obama holdover.
It's interesting. Acting Attorney General Sally Yates, the Obama holdover that President Trump kept for 2.5 weeks until she broke all the rules and refused to enforce his temporary immigration ban from terrorist countries, we thought it'd be interesting to get her emails from the time she was acting Attorney General. I think 2.5 weeks worth of emails. Of course, we didn't get them. We had to sue back in May, and we just got them, and they show emails from various Justice Department officials praising her, and what stood out among those emails was this email from Andrew Weissman, which you quoted earlier, talking about how he was in awe of her. Well, this guy, by the way, was head of the criminal fraud section of the Justice Department, probably still is technically while he's over there working for Mr. Mueller, and he is Mr. Mueller's top deputy. The Flynn prosecution,
but this is a guy
behind it.
Listen, remember, he was accused of making up laws that don't exist. He was accused of holding exculpatory evidence in the case of those poor Merrill guys that ended up going to jail for almost a year, and it turns out they did nothing. And the Supreme Court scorched him 9-0, as did the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals.
But he's also we now have an email showing that he was praising a government official for breaking the rules and standing against President Trump's enforcement of the rule of law. So this guy doesn't want to follow the rules. He admits it in the email.
This guy is abusively biased.
President Trump.
You cannot have political partisans, and this is my point from the beginning, and I had no idea how right I was. And that is, why is Mueller appointing people that only donate to Obama, Clinton, and the DNC? Why did he pick somebody like Weissman with his atrocious record? And then we find out he picks Peter Strzok and Peter Strzok's girlfriend, and they have a pro-Hillary, anti-Trump bias. And then you've got this guy praising Sally Yates, and one has to ask how politicized the criminal justice system is if these are the people that Mueller has appointed, and if they were not driven politically and ideologically from the get-go.